symbol of excellence in sports entertainment.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Can Chris Hero Save Wrestling right here on adfreeshows.com. And of course, we couldn't do it without Chris Hero himself. Chris, how are you, man?
I am superb, Conrad. I missed you, man. How are you?
Man, I'm excited to be here. I love picking your brain about wrestling. And today we're talking about one of my favorite topics, and that is the story of Ring of Honor and Chris Hero. And I guess we should start at the beginning of Ring of Honor. I think everyone listening to this probably knows that RF Video made a ton of money for years and years and years selling old shoot interviews. And of course, they were closely associated with ECW. And if you didn't get ECW syndicated TV, you could subscribe, and RF Video would send you a VHS. And I very much grew up in the tape trading era. Were you much of a tape trader back in the day?
Yes, I absolutely was. I don't think I had gotten my own tapes until, I would say, late 1999. I started training in the summer of 98. A guy I trained with named Adam, he had all the RF Video catalogs, and he didn't dive too far into the Japanese stuff, but he was interested in it. And then I think at some point in 1999, I started picking up a tape here or there, usually off of eBay, the early incarnation of eBay. And I happened upon some mailing list. I mean, you used to have these wrestling newsletters that would get sent to your email, whether it was like the Bagpipe Report or things like that. I just happened upon a mailing list for a wrestling tape guy. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want all of these, right? So my first batch of tapes were, unfortunately, one of them was the Abdul the Butcher shoot interview. I grew up, with a certain image of him, and I was so fascinated in what it would sound like if he's sitting there talking about the business. And as you know, wasn't a home run.
Nope.
But I got some tapes of guys that I had been familiar with through WWF and WCW, whether it was Liger or Ultimo Dragon. I had just seen Hayabusa and Shinzaki at Heatwave. So I got a Hayabusa tape. I got the Kaientai tapes. And this was really my introduction to Japanese wrestling as a whole. I got into the junior heavyweight style way before I started dipping into New Japan or All Japan.
So let's talk about, sort of the business model for Ring of Honor. When ECW first goes down, all of a sudden Feinstein and crew are looking around saying, hey man, what tapes are we going to sell now? WCW's gone, and it's not like we could have gotten a deal there. Of course, the WWF isn't going to play ball. So they decide, hey man, let's just create our own. And I think Ring of Honor was born out of the need to sell tapes, and it essentially became almost like a super independent, right?
Yeah, there was a show in October of 2001, a weekend of shows for APW, All Pro Wrestling, Roland Alexander's company that was featured in Beyond the Mat. And it was the second year they held this tournament, but it was called King of the Indies. And my goodness, the list of people in this tournament were incredible. Just kind of browsing at it right now, you've got Samoa Joe, Kazarian, Loki, Vinny Massaro, AJ Styles, Jardy France, Super Dragon, Christopher Daniels, Spanky and Bryan Danielson, Adam Pearce, Doug Williams, Tony Jones, Shooter Tony Jones from Beyond the Mat, Bison Smith, Donovan Morgan, and Scoot Andrews. That is a who's who of independent wrestling in 2001. Independent wrestling was so different back then because they weren't making a ton of money. So who is going to foot the bill to fly a guy cross coast when they haven't really proven themselves as any type of a draw in that area? The Super Indie, that was IWC. This King of the Indies was kind of born off of the idea of Jim Kettner's ECWA's Super 8, where he would have a handful of his local guys and then whoever the hot flavors were on the East Coast independent scene. And from what I understand, the videotape, it was a 2-tape set, of course, sold tape after tape after tape for RF Video, and they were like, oh my gosh, why don't we just have our own King of the Indies,
right?
Every month, every other month, whatever. And we can sell so many damn tapes that we just make our money back there. It doesn't matter, how many fans are there, hopefully we'll get some fans, but the money-making plan isn't contingent on a live gate. And they just, that's pretty much what they did. Ring of Honor, they took some of the guys that were, pretty popular for a local group called Jersey All Pro. And then they flew in some guys. They had some, they had like Christopher Daniels, Loki, American Dragon. They had a lot of those guys. And I remember it wasn't their main event, but the draw on their first show was Eddie Guerrero versus Super Crazy.
Right.
And that draws in just the smart fans like, oh, wow, what an interesting, cool matchup. These are two very talented wrestlers. And then it's the old school philosophy of putting on a show. You draw in your audience with a tantalizing matchup, and then hopefully they see someone local, or your regulars, that makes them want to come back for a second show. And, it worked very well for Ring of Honor.
Yeah, I think you're working at the time mainly with IWA Mid-South. Is that right?
That is correct. I started working for IWA in the summer of 2000. That kind of happened because I had done a tour for Insane Clown Posse's Juggalo Champion Shit Wrestling. And I had become friends with Madman Pondo and a couple of the other people, and they put in a good word for me for IWA. I was living in Dayton at the time, Charlestown, Indiana, where they were running 1 or 2 shows per week. That was only 2.5-hour drive for me. So I would just go down there, and that's where I met guys like Punk and Cabana and Ace Steel. So summer of 2000, I moved there in 2001. So I'm on all these shows. I kind of dabble a little bit internationally. I'm doing a little bit in Germany here and there. I am working occasionally in Pittsburgh, but IWA Mid-South was absolutely my bread and butter. I would consider myself an IWA Mid-South guy from that era.
I think the original story is Rob actually Feinstein from our video tried to buy into Combat Zone Wrestling and maybe make that his own sort of ECW Philadelphia based promotion, but that didn't happen. Is that the same story you heard?
Yeah, I did. I was not working regularly for CZW at the time, so I don't have all the details, but I did hear that. And there was also just this peculiar situation where West Coast based XPW plopped themselves into Philadelphia and started running the ECW arena. And there were some, you want to talk about bad blood. I mean, there's some rough stuff going on back then between CZW and XPW, but and Ring of Honor too, they were all running Philly at the same time. It was a very crazy time.
Yeah. I'm sure we're going to see more about that someday soon. Hint, hint. Let's talk a little bit about Ring of Honor. They're trying to appeal to the quote unquote smart mark, the work rate style fans. And they even developed something called the Code of Honor. Can you explain that to our listeners who don't know about it and tell us what you thought of it?
Yeah. Code of Honor was shaking hands before the match and shaking hands after the match. So it was kind of like a good sportsmanship thing. And I don't think it was a bad idea. I think it was something interesting, and I'm all for trying new things. I think it got a little repetitive over time. They eventually ditched it, but when you have a rule, you automatically have consequences when that rule is broken, and that is foundational in professional wrestling. So it's a good starting point and an interesting way to set themselves apart. The niche fans are the ones that want to see all the wrestling technique, all the high flying, all just action. They really want to see that action. So they're putting a little bit more weight in motion over emotion. So that is something that Ring of Honor eventually built around to. And they didn't know what they were doing at first. They didn't know what they were going to do at first, rather. Let me say that right. So they didn't know if this first show was going to be a success. They didn't know if these first 6 months of shows were going to go off the way they did. So then that's when they get a little bit more into the storylines and angles and such. And that's, you want to have a complete pro wrestling show to try to draw in fans from all areas, because at that time, if you were a hardcore fan, you were getting your hands on a Ring of Honor show, whether it was directly from them or from some bootlegger somewhere.
Let me ask you about independent wrestling in this era. Is this something, we've established that you used to do a lot of stuff in this era with IWA Mid-South. Is this something where if you were working with IWA Mid-South, but you'd like to be on one of these Ring of Honor shows, how does one go about getting booked? Do you wait for them to come out to you, or do you reach out to them, or what would that process typically look like for an independent guy looking for work with a new territory?
So this was in the era of sending out a demo tape, okay. An 8x10. You would send those out to different promoters. A guy that was very instrumental in a lot of our careers back then is a guy named Dave Prazak, founder of Shimmer. He was a manager, a ring announcer. He was a jack of all trades when it came to pro wrestling. And he could also hook up his double VCRs and put some music to it. And he'd make little music videos for us. And he would put that video with like a heel match and a babyface match. And he'd make, 5-6 copies, and he would send them out to promoters that he had connected with over the years. So that was one way to get booked. Another way is just word of mouth. Somebody would, a promoter would hear about someone, or they'd see footage, and then they'd try to maybe find their website or find out what their AOL Instant Messenger name was, which is kind of funny looking back on. But in a lot of my situations, it would depend on who I was acquainted with, who I was friendly with. And there is just something to be said about going into a certain territory and having a match with a guy and just really tearing it up and just be like, man, I want to wrestle this guy more. And then you'd go back to your home promotion and say, hey, man, I just had a killer match with this guy. We should look into bringing him in. And then that's when you get into the situation of conflicting dates, or how much they need for trans, or who they can hop in a car with, et cetera, et cetera. So it was kind of Wild West-ish, but I'm very fortunate to have had that experience of going up and down the roads and making friends with people. And a lot of the breaks that I got in my career were not just some happenstance, some sort of moment of chance that I spoke to one person, or I was at this show and whatever. And then you just meet someone, and next thing you know, you're in Germany for the first time, and you're like, how the hell did this happen? Or you meet someone and you end up, oh man, I've got a flight to Japan in the morning. That's crazy. But it's just these different, you put yourself in as many situations as possible. And then you just are hoping for something to stick.
Talk to me about your first interaction. Back then, I guess it was probably Rob and Doug Gentry and Gabe. Who would you have had your first conversation with about possibly doing some work with Ring of Honor, and what was the result of that conversation?
So I got the cold shoulder from Ring of Honor for the first couple of years, actually. And it wasn't as if I had called someone up to speak with them directly, or I'd sent an email or whatever. You just kind of hear through the grapevine as far as people pitching your name to someone to see if they'd be interested in using you. And I mean, I'm sure Gabe will still deny this to this day, but the word that I had gotten back on working for Ring of Honor, I'm going to guess sometime in 2003, was, we already have enough guys that work in t-shirts. And I came up with Punk and Colt Cabana. Like, it was the three of us, and alongside BJ Whitmer as well, Ace Steel as well. We were kind of this cluster of guys from the Midwest that would hop in cars together, or hop in minivans together and try to get in shows, and wherever those shows may be, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, etc. And I think Ring of Honor had kind of cherry picked Punk because they loved his promos. Cabana looked great. They grabbed Cabana. I mean, he was also a good wrestler. Both those guys are, but I think that was the impetus for getting those guys. And I think they saw me as not being as good a shape as Cabana, not cutting as good promos as Punk, and just kind of felt like, we don't need all three of them. I don't really know if that conversation ever took place, but that's kind of how it felt to me at that time. I kind of felt like I was the redheaded stepchild of that trio. And I had some very vocal fans that wanted to see me work with a lot of the guys in Ring of Honor. So my God, you couldn't go onto a message board back then without a verbal contingent of people that hated Chris Hero, and then a verbal contingent of people that were like, that thought I was the best. Right. So that, I think that also put Gabe off, that, he's got these people trolling him on message boards about why don't you use Hero? Why do you whatever. And I think he was just like, God damn, I just get this guy out of here. I never want to deal with him. So right. A guy that, started off as a student of mine, but ended up going on to much greater things was Claudio Castagnoli, aka Cesaro. He started to work for Ring of Honor in the summer of 2005. And I felt a little bad for him because he's going there based on his own merit and his own abilities. He'd only been in the States a year at that time, not even a full year. And he's already getting looked at because, God, he was such a hard worker. He looked great. He really brought something unique to the shows, and Ring of Honor was interested in him. He went in, he wrestled Nigel, Alex Shelley, Milano Collection. He wrestled these matches with these guys, but a little bit of the feedback was kind of like, oh, when's Hero going to show up? Or, oh, that means Hero's going to be there, etc. So that was an interesting thing that was going on. And again, further, more to my point of Gabe not being interested in bringing me in, because he brings in this guy I'm teaming with and is not interested in using me.
How much of that do you think was, maybe some of the contributing factors would have been, I don't know how to say this. IWA Mid-South at times had a pretty controversial reputation because of the promoter Ian Rotten. Talk to us a little bit about that, because I'm sure what I said sounded like hieroglyphics to some of our listeners, but give some context to what IWA Mid-South was and maybe what the reputation of Ian was and how maybe that rubbed some people the wrong way.
Ian was in a tag team with his trainer, Axel Rotten. They teamed as the Bad Breed. They worked in Global, they worked in Memphis, and most famously, they worked in ECW. Ian had a falling out with Paul and left ECW, which left Axel there as a singles. And Ian, the entrepreneur that he is, decided, wow, let me try to start my own. I don't want to call it a mini ECW, but just, I want to bring wrestling to the Louisville, Kentucky area with that same vibe, with that same energy. And he was a guy that was also familiar with all the death matches in Japan. So he had that at his disposal rather. And he was just like, well, let me get some local guys, some people I'm friendly with, some old school Memphis guys, and let's start running shows. And when we have a death match, it's not going to be a barbed wire bat. It's going to be, the ropes are tied in barbed wire. There are going to be light tubes out there. We're going to have thumbtacks all over the ring. One side of the ring is going to have fire. There's going to be an alligator on this side of the ring. Like, he just wanted to bring people stuff that they, in their wildest dreams, they never thought was possible. And in that process, he did two things. He started to cultivate and kind of galvanize a fan base that loved that hardcore style of wrestling, extreme hardcore, like way beyond what you would see on television. And number two, he pissed off Jim Cornette and Danny Davis. The reason he did so is because not only was he in their territory, Ian was running these venues and one thing would lead to another, and the venue would be like, oh my God, why is there so much blood here? Or you broke this table, or you did this, and they'd end up booting them out of the venue. He'd move to a different venue, etc. I was not around at this time, so I'm just, relaying stories that I had heard over the years.
Sure.
So these venues causing a fuss, local wrestlers causing a fuss, caused the Kentucky State Athletic Commission to intervene and just start a harsh regulation on professional wrestling in the state of Kentucky. And that made it difficult for Danny Davis's OVW. Jim Cornette was there at that same time, and it just made their life hell because they're not doing these type of matches, but now they have to abide by these rules and regulations and whatever fees they would have to pay. They felt that Ian had damaged pro wrestling's reputation in that area. So Ian hopped across the bridge and started running shows in Indiana, who has no state athletic commission when it comes to pro wrestling. So that energy from Jim Cornette and Danny Davis kind of carried over into the fan base a little bit, of people saying that IWA was just garbage. They were just, the fans didn't care about wrestling. They only wanted to see people get hurt. And the difficulty there is that Ian loves straight up wrestling. He loves it so much. I mean, he's a good, amateur style wrestler in his own right, good submission style wrestler. And it was just a matter of finding the talent that could have those type of matches alongside his death matches. So he would bring in guys like Reckless Youth, Ace Darling. Of course, Tracy Smothers was on his first ever show. He wanted a balance of that type of wrestling, but because of how far they pushed things with the hardcore, it left bad taste on a lot of people's mouths. So when you were telling somebody in 2000, hey, I'm going to go work for IWA Mid-South, they'd be like, oh my God, that's the one with the barefoot thumbtacks and whatever. Like, are you doing a hardcore match? I'm like, no, I'm wrestling BJ Whitmer in just a straight up match. Or, I'm in a tag match with Ace Steel and Danny Dominion, or I'm wrestling Chucky Smooth. So the perception was harmed by that, especially because this is the tape trading era. So these people aren't necessarily seeing these matches firsthand. They're just reading about it on message boards and hearing about it.
Do you think that was part of it? Do you think Gabe or whoever at Ring of Honor had some sort of a, I don't know, negative connotation for your name just because it was associated with IWA Mid-South?
I think there might be a little bit of truth in that, but I'm going to guess that it had more to do with the gear that I wore. I had these baggy white pants. I had a sleeveless Chris Hero or Superman shirt that I would wear. And I was not a physical specimen aside from my height and agility. So I think that, maybe the people behind the scenes didn't really think that there was anything that I would bring to the table that they didn't have somebody that was either more athletic, in better shape, cut better promos, etc. So
talk to me about your gear. You mentioned it briefly there, but if you're hearing feedback, and again, I'm not a wrestler, I don't know, but if you're hearing feedback that, oh man, people really don't like your gear, do you stay true to what you want and what you like? Or do you think, well, shit, man, if that's all it is, maybe I do need to design some new stuff?
It's 50-50 because you don't want to, how do I say this? You don't want to change who you are, and you automatically feel insulted where you think, am I not good enough? But if I put this gear on, I'll be good enough. Nothing changes except for what I'm wearing. That's kind of silly. However, at the same time, I did have aspirations to get some gear. Man, I had these great boots from Stagecoach, and I was just kind of going along with the look that I had at that time. I got my own logo made up, got my custom shirts, and in that time, it just kind of fit with what I was doing. But I can understand why someone would be put off by that. it wasn't until 2003 that I got my first like legit spandex gear. I had the the sleeveless Chris Hero top, and I had the baggy white pants with the little Chris Hero logo on them, Hero down one leg, just the shiny pleather pants that were so popular in that era. That is something that I wanted. It's just a matter of how much it's going to cost, who you're going to be in contact with, who, is it something that's feasible? There weren't as many gear makers back then as there are now. So you got to put yourself out there. And this was a time in my life when I was very poor. I had several times throughout my career where I would be working the equivalent of paycheck to paycheck with the hope that the work that I put in here will eventually pay off. And there are so many shows I was doing just for gas money or just to get that experience, to get that exposure. And like I said, you never know who you're going to meet. So I would say at the time for me, it was a bit financial. There was probably a little bit of pride thrown in there. But as you can see, if we're talking about 2002, when Ring of Honor starts, I have gear by the summer of 2003, like legit gear that is, custom and looks nice, kind of the iconic Chris Hero look from that era.
Let's talk a little bit about 2005, the Ted Petty Invitational Tournament. A lot of us used to call that the TPI. Happens for IWA Mid-South in 2005. And they happened to bring in Bryan Danielson for that tournament, who we recently watched you wrestle here on the show. And you're the guy who eliminates him. Danielson at the time was probably the top guy for Ring of Honor. What changed for your career after that match, getting a win over the top guy for Ring of Honor?
So as you said, TPI was IWA Mid-South's yearly tournament to showcase technical wrestling, high-flying wrestling, just hard-hitting stuff, just best pure wrestling, which was on the opposite end of the spectrum from their yearly King of the Death matches. I had been in the very first one when it was still called the Sweet Science 16. They had that for about 2 years. And then in 2002, they had their first ever TPI. Ian was very close with Ted Petty, aka Rocco Rock. And he thought that Ted was a guy that people knew from Public Enemy. And they knew him as the guy that would put people through tables and the no. Yeah, exactly. But he didn't feel that people knew how good he was in the ring and his technique and just he was the damn cheetah kid before all of that. Very talented guy. And I think Ian maybe saw a parallel between the perception of Rocco Rock and the perception of IWA Mid-South, where people think that IWA Mid-South is this one thing. However, he does love great technical wrestling, and he would bring in guys from all over the country. That 2002 TPI was the first matches in IWA history for AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, Super Dragon. He brought in a lot of people for that because he saw King of the Indies too. And he's like, wow, we got to really step our game up. By 2005, I was a babyface at the time, and that weekend for me was very instrumental in directing where I would go from there as it pertains to IWA Mid-South. I wrestled a guy named Rain Man from Wildside in Georgia in the first round. Second round, I wrestled Bryan Danielson, and he was the Ring of Honor World Champion. And back then, I mean, it's not like it's changed anywhere, but when you are the champion for a company, there is, what is the word I'm looking for? You have a responsibility to represent your company in as good a light as possible. So if you're the champion somewhere, it is not a good look to work for 4 other companies and you're losing every match for every other company, because by proxy, in a kayfabe sense, you are making that promotion's champion look like he can't beat people in the other territory.
Right.
And Samoa Joe's reign with the Ring of Honor Championship was so well regarded because he was very strict about what he would do, where he would go, who he would put over. And I don't know the breakdown, but it's some of that is because of Gabe and some of it is because of Joe. And they were very protective over his win-loss record in that era. Now with Danielson, they wanted the same thing. He was the champion. They wanted him to be the flag bearer of Ring of Honor. Everybody knew how good he was, but in 2005, he's hitting a different stride in his career that he, the next year of title matches he had for Ring of Honor were just exceptional, some wonderful work. And I'm wrestling this guy in the second round of a tournament, and he's the champion of Ring of Honor, and our fans know it, his fans know it. And he was told from the Ring of Honor end, hey, listen, if you lose, have it be a DQ, have it be a count out, whatever. So he had relayed that to us, but not with any type of attitude. He was just kind of like, hey, this is what they want me to do, whatever. And when you're in a technical wrestling tournament, the booking, you want to book things so that they are as satisfying as possible. You don't want to have a lot of shenanigans. You don't want to have a lot of run-ins. You don't want to have a lot of screwy finishes. And I don't remember at which point I came up with it, but I had the idea to work over Bryan's leg throughout the course of the match. And I just said, hey man, what if I'm working over your left leg? You go to throw an enziguri at me with your right leg, but I duck it. And as soon as I duck it, I cradle you over with that same leg that I'm holding for just a tight, quick flash pin. I'm like, let's, what do you think about that? Not, I didn't have to plead with him or anything like, hey, can we do a clean finish? But I just presented it to him, and then he thought about it for a little bit and he goes, yeah, sure. No problem. So for me, a good opportunity for me to get a win over the top dog in another company. Later that night, I wrestled a guy named Eric Cannon, who is from the Minnesota area and someone I had great in-ring chemistry with. He is actually the trainer of a tag team in AEW, Top Flight. Cannon has been around for years. I first met him in 2003, but he and I had a big match there. Our situation in IWA was he was always the dickhead. I was always the local hero and, trying to do things the right way. In that match, he beat me clean. And after the match, I went to give him his kudos, and then I lost my shit. I turned on him. A couple of my students came from the back, Mickey Knuckles, Trick Davis, referee Bryce Remsburg. I beat the shit out of all of them. I just really changed this gear into a vicious ass kicker instead of the humble, wholesome hero that I was in IWA. So it's interesting that this Danielson match happened, and then later that night I turned and would kind of be putting the wheels in motion to kind of carry this heel character on for the next couple of years. To make this a little bit shorter, Gabe had heard that his champion lost to Chris Hero, which I'm sure he was not super pleased about. I don't think he flipped any tables or anything, maybe he did. But this also coincided in a time when the Philadelphia market for Ring of Honor was dwindling. I don't know the exact numbers, but I do know they brought in Kenta Kobashi for a show in Philly, and the draw was disappointing. I'm not going to blame that on Kobashi. He's a legend, but whatever they were presenting at that time, it just was not registering in that Philly area. So Gabe, combined with this thought that, Hero just beat my champion, and oh man, Hero works for CZW. We're getting ready to run that area again. Let's give it one more shot and see if it goes well. He connected to me and asked me my thought of coming in and doing a one shot for Ring of Honor. Just basically for Bryan to get his win back to prove that he could defeat Chris Hero in a singles match, and to try to give a little bit of a boost, because what had happened was CZW and Ring of Honor booked the same day in Philly. And I had mentioned earlier about the XPW, CZW controversy and how kind of ugly that got about stealing buildings, stealing territory, stealing talent. Gabe did not want to fight with CZW. They wanted to come to some kind of an agreement. And he approached me with this idea, and I thought, well, if I'm going to debut for Ring of Honor, what better place to do it than in the main event against the best wrestler in the world?
Wow. A lot to unpack there. Let's talk very briefly about Eric Cannon. It's a name we don't hear very much of these days, but back in that era, man, it felt like a lot of people were saying he was sort of one of the unsung heroes of the independent scene. And it feels like, whereas most of these guys who were held in such high regard did get their big break, for whatever reason, I don't know that Eric Cannon really ever did. How do you reconcile that?
I would say that it has to do with right place, right time.
Sure.
And he was always up in Minnesota. He worked a lot over the years for Chikara, worked plenty for IWA Mid-South. He did a little bit for Ring of Honor here and there. He worked for Dragon Gate USA. So he got little bits here and there, but a flight from Minnesota will set you back $500-600. And when you're trying to pinch pennies as an independent wrestling company, or Ring of Honor, who, was way over budget in a lot of the different contracts they had or deals they had, it's hard for them to spend a ton of money on flights for people when whoever is in charge doesn't see any type of long-term plan for that. So I really think, just like I said, right place, right time, or wrong place, wrong time. He is one of my favorite opponents I've ever wrestled. We probably wrestled 7 or 8 different places. And, he was in the same faction with myself and Claudio when we first started calling ourselves the Kings of Wrestling. We did this big angle in Chikara where we turned on Quack and just, ran roughshod over the company for a little while. He's great. He's talented. He's a good coach. I think maybe his most recent thing, I think he did a match or 2 for 205 in the last few years. But he runs a company up there, a very successful independent company called, First, and they run the historic First Ave in downtown Minneapolis. If you've seen any of the videos from those shows, the crowds are just awesome. They really pack it in. It's an awesome venue, and he uses a lot of awesome young talent, as evidenced, as I said earlier, by him being the coach for guys like Top Flight.
Is there a lesson to be learned from his story that it's as silly as this sounds, but you need to be easy to hire? You need to be in a place that you can drive to, or you can get cheap flights, or is there any sort of takeaway? Am I overthinking that maybe?
No, I don't think you're overthinking it. It is very much situational. And I think maybe in his situation, there wasn't a place that he thought, if I go here, maybe some more doors will open for me. But there is something to be said for betting on yourself. And, what I tell guys that are very new, that are looking to branch out, save up your money, do what you can to support your wrestling habit, right? And once you have a couple $1,000 saved up, use your contacts and spend a couple months going to the East Coast, spend a couple months down in Florida, spend a couple months in the Midwest. And it's not that you're going to magically be on a show, somebody's going to see you and sign you to a contract that's going to change your life. But by process of elimination, you go here, you cover this territory, you meet these people, you have matches with these people. Then you go down here and you repeat the process over and over and over. And eventually you're just meeting all of these people. You're showing them what you have to offer as a talent, but you're also connecting with people on a personal level. And if you know anything about pro wrestling, having connections is very helpful. And there are some people that consistently have jobs because of the connections that they have. So it doesn't hurt you to, as I said, bet on yourself and dive into an area and just give it all you got for a couple months. And if that doesn't work, go back home, regroup, look, reevaluate, see what you can do better or do differently, and then pick a new place to go to.
Let's talk more about the CZW Ring of Honor day. I say day because, well, this is a pretty important day in the history of your career. Take us through it.
How this all started was at Cage of Death 7. Myself and Claudio wrestled Eddie Kingston and Sabian, and we defended the CZW Tag Team Championship. And I'm a heel at this time. I take
you off, but CZW Cage of Death is sort of like their WrestleMania, right?
Oh, absolutely. And and they legit have a Cage of Death, this giant monstrosity where people get put through it, put over it. It is just the damnedest thing. If you've never heard of it, pop it in on YouTube and you'll see some highlights that are just insane. And then we actually end up getting to our own Cage of Death throughout all of this. So December 2005, biggest show of the year for CZW. We defend our tag team championship and I take the microphone. And this is very difficult because I'm a heel. And I start talking into this promo. And if you know anything about CZW atmosphere and heels trying to cut promos, I get hit with that air horn like 3 times right away. And basically what I mean is that every time I try to say something, there's a dude going burr, burr, which, in character would piss me off, but I know that I have to get this point across to the crowd. So I'm patient with it. And I just kind of tell this story to the crowd. They have no clue what's going on. They have no clue why I'm talking. And I just, beat a babyface tag team. So it's not like they have any inclination to listen to what I have to say, no matter how I plead with them. I say that Ring of Honor is coming to Philadelphia. Right. Ring of Honor runs Philly, 2-3 times a year. CZW is here every month. And when they come to Philly, what do? They run on the same damn day. Right. What are, the kind of, and I know that some people did feel resentful toward Ring of Honor. And I don't know people specifically, but I know there was just that kind of energy there where people were like, man, what the hell? Like, of all the weekends they can do or whatever, they decide to run on the same day that we run. I basically, through the gist of this promo, I say, listen, Danielson's got an open challenge for people challenging for his title. Well, I'm going to challenge him to show up at our afternoon show in January. And then if he shows up at our show, I'll show up at his. And not many people knew that I was going to cut this promo. We kept it very quiet. And the promo basically turned me babyface. I mean, there were still people booing me at the end, but for the most part, people were like, yeah, man, CZW, cool, which is, one of the fun things about promos, when you can take a certain type of wave from the crowd and kind of push it back to them in a different direction. That's awesome when you have the opportunity to do that. I get to the back and it wasn't instantly, but I was approached by Zandig very shortly after that promo. And he was so pissed. He's like, why, who told you to mention their name on the microphone? Like what? And at this point I had kind of figured out like, oh, I don't think he really knows what's going on. Because at that time, John Zandig was not the booker, but he's the head guy and he does make decisions here or there. Mike Burns from Smart Mark Video was the booker. He was the guy that I dealt with. He's the guy that was, I assume, setting things up with Gabe to try to work this all out and figure out how we were going to do this. So it's funny that I'm out there to cut this promo and the guy who owns the company doesn't realize it and he gets pissed at me in the back and then ends up having a falling out that night, I believe, with Mike Burns. And then Mike Burns, my guy that brought me back to CZW, is gone. And this whole CZW Ring of Honor thing is going to start up. And then we don't have the guy booking it. that would, understand how to get the most out of everything that we're going to do. Anyway, I digress. I cut this promo, turns me babyface, and then it sets up this situation where, is he shooting on them? Does he mean the things he's saying? Back then, Conrad, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, you may be, but we used to have a form of online blogging called LiveJournal.
Oh yeah.
So I utilized my LiveJournal to cut some promos on Ring of Honor, and it's just was really good at generating interest. I'd sit by my computer and I'd type up. It's like an eFed promo almost, right? You're just trying to whatever. So I would type this promo up. I'd put it out on LiveJournal. It would get cross-posted onto the Ring of Honor forum or the CZW fans forum. And then this would generate interest. And people are like, oh my gosh, you had your CZW fans, you had your Ring of Honor fans, and now it's just drawing up more interest for these shows. We do this afternoon show, and sure enough, Danielson comes into the ring, and it's so funny. This promo, I believe, is on YouTube. Danielson is at Ring of Honor, where they don't have a ton of vulgarity back then. They're not super clean cut, but they're not CZW, where every other word is an F-bomb.
Right.
So Danielson grabs this mic with this shit-eating grin, and then he proceeds to just cut the most vulgar, heinous promo. He just loves it. He's got so much heat from this audience, for people that hate him because he represents the brand that they hate. And then it turns into this whole melee where some of us come out and we chase them out of the building. They legit hop into a car and drive off, which I think is always funny. They're going to their show. I got to go back in and wrestle. And we had a 6-man tag. If you give me one moment, I'm kind of blanking on who was in this match.
I think it was Claudio and Super Dragon.
It was Claudio. Yeah, Claudio and Super Dragon. I wasn't sure if Necro was there or not. That was later. Against the guys from Blackout. Kingston, Ruckus, Sabian, and just had a fun match with a really hot crowd. And then I go to the back, pack my stuff off, and I head over to the Philadelphia Armory for my match later that night.
Tell us about walking into the Ring of Honor show. What was your conversation like with Gabe leading up to that? Was it contentious or was everything cool by this point?
Gabe was all business. He was excited for all the buzz, all the different things we had done. Also, another name to throw in the hat here is Jim Cornette. Jim Cornette was kind of acting as a commissioner for Ring of Honor at that time. And knowing Jim, and like I mentioned earlier, he hated IWA Mid-South and the garbage wrestling, that would extend over to CZW as well. Cause if you know Jim Cornette's tastes, they are not ultra-violent wrestling. So that gave Jim the platform to kind of cut promos on all that stuff. And for me, it's like, oh man, I'm, cutting promos against this guy who I watched as a kid. So that was a fun little element. Walking into the locker room, you have this idea of this separate company that's gonna, whatever, it has a certain perception. But the second you walk into that venue, it's just a wrestling locker room.
Yep.
And oh man, I haven't seen this guy in a couple months. Like, oh, here's my buddy, or oh, I'm meeting this guy for the first time. Man, he was really nice.
Yeah.
So it's just not what you would expect. I would say both the Ring of Honor and the CZW locker room had people in that did not like the other company for whatever reason, whether they thought it was just shitty or just, bad attitudes or whatever. There were definitely people in each locker room that did not care for the other company. But in this situation, everybody was very welcoming. It was a fun thing. And I was very fortunate to kind of be able to call my own shots and do what I wanted. Bryan, as a guy I'd wrestled many times, and he and I had no problems when it came to in-ring chemistry, but I wanted to add some little details to the match. So I had Adam Flash, Spider Nate Webb, Necro Butcher, and referee Bryce Remsburg accompany me to the ring. so that we would have a Ring of Honor referee. We'd also have a CZW referee on the floor. At CZW, they had these horrendous neon shirts, these neon t-shirts with the CZW logo on them. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, we got to wear those shirts.
Right.
Like they're so obnoxious and ugly. You know, they look like you're working construction or something, or you're on your bike, you're trying not to get run over. So I have this crew with me wearing these CZW shirts. We walk in through the crowd. I didn't want to have a regular entrance because even though there's a certain suspension of disbelief, I like adding little details that made people think, oh, it helps them get lost in it. So we barged in through the front door. We came in through the fans. I got the DJ. I had a CD that had CZW written on it. I handed it to the DJ, or I had Bryce hand it to the DJ. We kind of make our way through the crowd. They play the famous CZW song, like the pain, the bra, survive, you know, that whole vibe. So a very funny moment for me getting to come out to that song, which is kind of like a CZW meme song. And the way the crowd was separated, you had bleachers on each side of the ring, on east and west, if you will. And one side was CZW and one side was Ring of Honor. And it was just very fun to have that dynamic. You're not just connecting with one large audience. You have different sides that you can play off of each other. And it was really fun to kind of have that atmosphere. We hop over the guardrail, we're climbing up. Of course, Necro Butcher grabs a chair and starts bashing himself in the head with it. He is bleeding and he's not even in the damn match. He's standing ringside. And it just made for a really cool atmosphere.
People were losing their mind at this. I mean, you got to put this in context. This Ring of Honor and Code of Honor, I mean, this is the quote unquote smart mark, work rate, blah, blah, blah. And now here's the freaking Necro Butcher. And yeah, I mean, this is probably one of, if not the hottest Ring of Honor angle, actually independent angle of the year. Would you say?
I would absolutely say so. If you ever talk to Gabe, this whole situation that arose from this is his favorite thing that he's ever done in pro wrestling. And it was very cool to be a part of. And we just had so many valuable members across the board on both sides, and just a lot of people behind the scenes making everything work. And it just, what was meant to be one night, just a one night one-off. I remember Gabe telling me earlier that, when I got to the venue, just being like, man, this has gone so well. Like, I'm going to try to come up with something as kind of like a make good, because, he was so happy with the live journal promos that I had cut, and just the energy that I had put into it from my end, that he was going to, the show hadn't even happened yet, and he was already going to try to find something for me to do at least one other time and get me another payday. And as it turns out, it ended up becoming a 5-month-long angle or so, and something that people still talk about today.
All time in your career, where does this rank as far as your favorite angle you were involved in?
I mean, it's got to be up there. It's got to be. I don't want to weigh it against anything right now, but I have no problem saying top 3.
Wow.
Just the energy and the steps that we were able to do. We brought it back in a 6-man tag. We'll cover that, of course. We'll cover this whole thing at a later date, but the 6-man tag culminating in a cage of death in Ring of Honor, like if you would have started that year and told Ring of Honor fans like, oh, there's going to be a CZW cage of death at Ring of Honor, I don't think anybody would have believed it.
No.
And the CZW end of the angle, John Zandig's side, he was not super into it. He didn't love doing it. So it could have been much better on his end. But every time one of the Ring of Honor shows happened and we ran some kind of an angle or we had a match, like, it was a home run every time.
Well, this was a home run episode. I love talking about storylines from the independent run of your career, because it feels like, especially in that era, storylines were sort of hit or miss. You know, it was more about we're going to have great matches or interesting matchups. But when you can really double down on story, that's what gets people emotionally charged. And go out of your way to see that clip of you guys coming through the crowd because the fans were into it, man. And it seems like a lot of the folks who are in the business are into this podcast. Every week you're dropping a little knowledge on us. Some words of wisdom. What do you have for us this week, Chris?
The hot topic, one of the many, seems to be about slapping your leg.
It's everywhere.
Right. I've seen a shitload of tweets about it. I've seen some posts about it. I've had people message me asking my opinion, and I think it's really funny. I think it's a funny thing. So I will say this. I think slapping your leg, or any type of motion that you use to create a little additional sound with your motion, I think it is great as long as you're great at it. It's like a good magician, right? You see what he does it, but you can't figure out exactly how he's doing it. Maybe if you put it in slow-mo, you can see a little bit of sleight of hand where the card moves or where the quarter moves or whatever it is. But in real time, it happens so quick that it does not take you out of it. When you are not good at this and you are just doing it because you see other people do it, and also just a sound is a cheap way to get an easy reaction from the crowd. When you don't do it to its fullest capacity, the fullest ability that you have, you're just robbing yourself. You are taking people out of what you're doing. You are... I don't want to say exposing, because for the most part, we're all in on it, right? But don't rub it in our faces. Yeah. I'm not big into a lot of the tongue-in-cheek stuff. There are certain things that I'm very forgiving of, and whether it comes to certain comedy matches or certain environments that are conducive to irrational pro wrestling behavior. But when it comes to slapping your leg or whatever, I see it just as the guys in the 70s that would stomp their legs on a punch or a club or whatever. I go back to elementary school in the 80s, and there were kids back then that would, this is what wrestlers do, right? So it's not like it's anything super new. It's just a different version of it. I don't think you should tell people to not slap their legs.
Right.
I think you should police people on how well they are, or how well they slap their legs. So if you are a talent listening to this and you would like to gain a little bit from this, it's across the board in pro wrestling. If you are not exceptional at something, don't do it. Right? There are some things you can practice and work on, but when you watch it back for yourself, like I said before, hold yourself to a higher standard. If it does not look good, put in the time in the gym to get better at it, right? Listen to your peers. Ask them how it looks. If it's really obvious that you're slapping your damn leg, you are doing yourself a disservice, because you are pulling people out of the match when you do something super obvious. So I think the job isn't necessarily on the talent to not do this. I think it is on the producers to tell the people that are good at it, have a ball, do your thing. And the people that are not good at it, speak up to them. Tell them, say, hey man, this thing that you're doing, it kind of looks like shit. I've been told that many times, and I can look back on my stuff and be like, oh my God, I am embarrassed. My face is red just watching myself do this, right? Be honest with yourself. Really put in that effort, and you won't have to worry about, nobody slaps their leg. You're going to get fined, or you're going to get whatever. It's bullshit, right? Just have some integrity, have some personal, professional integrity, and don't do something unless you're exceptional at it.
Well, something else you're pretty good at is playing us out with the song of the week. What do you got for us this week?
There is a rapper out of the Chicago area by the name of Lupe Fiasco. I love his first two albums so much. Since then, he's put out a lot of different projects that I've enjoyed greatly, but I particularly love his first two albums. He has a song called Put You On Game, and there's no chorus. It is just a straight verse, and it is from the point of view rather of let's say the devil, right? And just basically explaining how he has existed in every nook and cranny that's ever been, whether it's in art or poetry or in schools, in hospitals, and people making money, etc. It's just him explaining how he has managed to exist throughout all time. And it's just very poetic. It's got a good little kind of trance beat to it. I love it. Put You On Game by Lupe Fiasco is my song of the week.
Here we go. Lupe Fiasco. And we'll see you next week right here on Can Chris Hero Save Wrestling? Right here on adfreeshows.com.